Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is so wonderful to have people here today. This is the first formal event of the day. Our panel talk, we have some amazing guests this year. So I'm going to start over there. We have Jim Parkyn. We have Jasper Fforde, returning after a year's absence, but we're thrilled to have him back, is Rik Carranza. And sitting next to me here is Andrew Donkin. My name's Herward. I'm one of the directors of Ocon and the current reigning Ocon quiz champion. So I just thought I'd be wearing the badge today. So, well, I thought we're one of the things we are going to talk today about is comedy and humour. All of the guests here make use of comedy and humour in their work. So we're going to sort of pick their brains about that and sort of look at why funny, what is funny, and how can you be funny. So there we are. That's the plan for today. And we're going to do this all in 45 minutes. Yes. They very kindly volunteered, in case the microphones do fail today, they're going to give their answers through the medium of dance as well. So I'm going to start a really straightforward question. Tell us a bit about yourselves. So I'll start at the far end. Jim, if you want to kick us off.
Brilliant. Don't know if I lift it or... I think we go. I think we'll have it...
You could take the mic out.
We can go roving. I'm roving Mike. Yeah. Brilliant. So yeah, my name's Jim Parkyn. I am a professional plasticine player, and I've got a nearly 30-year career working in stop motion as a plasticine player and also as a kind of burgeoning director as well.
Hello, my name's Jasper Fforde. I'm an author. I live in Wales. I've been writing sort of absurdist books now for the last, nearly 30 years.
Hi, my name is Rik. I'm a stand-up comedian, podcaster, YouTuber, Twitch streamer, all those things. Anything that you can do, I will do it for fun and money as well. So that's the other thing. So. Yeah.
My name's Andrew Donkin. I'm a writer. I write children's books and graphic novels, kids' books of fiction, non-fiction, lots of different age ranges, and most recently, kind of a lot of the last 15 years has been spent writing graphic novels, original ones, and sometimes adaptions of other people's books.
That is absolutely brilliant. Okay, so first question, I suppose, is going to be why humour? Why comedy? What is it that makes humour so effective in the medium that you work in?
Okay. Oh, okay. So no pressure. Well, I think it's fun to make people cry with plasticine, but it's more funny to make people laugh, really. And I think, yeah, again, kind of animation, kind of that very early start of film, and the most basic form of filmmaking, literally taking a picture and ratcheting a bit of film. And I think people just have a propensity for the ridiculous, and animation really lends itself to that. One of the things that I'm really famed for in my 30-year career is bums. So I make most of the bums that feature in our animations, blown up bums with Wallace and a barrel, dog's bottoms, bear bottoms, all sorts of things. Essentially, I was told as an animation tutor has always told us, don't make your career, you can't build a career on bums, farts and pants. And I actually, frankly, had. I think, we can get very sophisticated, we can get very surrealist, but I think for me, it all boils down to bums, essentially. So, yeah, a fascination with bums that has never really left me.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in there. I studied English literature at university for my first degree, and Chaucer is basically all fart gags and knob gags and stuff. So, yeah, bums are funny. I think we're all in agreement here.
That was one of my first professional jobs, was making silicon boobs and bums for The Miller's Tale, actually, animated in Wales by a company called ARG. So,
I remember that one as well. That's wonderful. And you revealed to me yesterday when we picked you up from the ferry terminal that you actually did a lot of the work on the chicken bottoms in Chicken Run. Is that right?
Sanding chicken bums. So yes, sanding the. So I've had a hand in bottoms for my entire career, shall we say?
I've just noticed Kathleen, our admiral, just came through. She can obviously hear all this talk of bottoms, and she's like, "Oh
Sorry,
no,
this-
it's degenerated already."
I'm afraid that's usually what happens with me. So I will pass on to somebody far more mature than.
Well, getting off bottoms for the moment. Yeah, I mean, comedy is great because when you're writing or you're doing anything that is with an audience and you want to engage through the medium of joy, is always a great way of doing it. I mean, there's all different types of comedy, and you can connect with people in all different kind of ways. I mean, just through good old-fashioned belly laughs, and also through satire is a wonderful way of connecting with an audience. Because when you're trying to write a book and you're trying to connect with a reader who may be 100 years in the future and might be 1,000 miles away, you've got to find something that really links us all together. And when it comes down to it, humour, I think, is a great linking factor between humans. And even when things are at their very, very worst, there's going to be jokes. And they're going to be pretty dark, but they're going to be good. And they're going to be connecting, and they're going to be ways in which we can relate to other humans, and also sometimes take a lot of the danger out of a situation, or a lot of the stress out of a situation. So a world without humour, I think, is probably not really a world really worth wanting to be in, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, interesting. I've had 16 years doing stand-up comedy, and I love comedy. I love laughing. I love making other people laugh, and that's come from a very young age. And I think because it's such a pure way of connecting with people. I think, like, when you think about one of the earliest memories that you have of, like, say you have children, it's the first time you make a child laugh. It's an amazing experience, and then so if you can do that again and again and again, and even when it's with adults, it's much harder. You can't just dangle your keys and expect. I mean, sometimes, if you get them, yeah. But it's a shared experience when you can make someone laugh, when you can make a group of people laugh, when you have that story and you all laugh at the situation. We're all sharing that. Some other emotions can be very individual, but I find with laughter and humor, it can be a much more shared experience, which I love. It's a group thing.
Thank you. A lot of the stuff that I write when it comes to graphic novels is often quite serious or about serious subjects, but it's really, really important when you're writing about stuff that there's a mixture of idioms, that you break the tension with humour, and it's a fantastic way of bursting tension. If you've got a dramatic scene, or in a horror film, think how many horror films there are laughs in, and often the sort of the difference between a really good Marvel film, for example, and a not so good Marvel film is the level of wit in it. The effects and everything are always the same. They're always fantastic. But when you've got a witty script and the lines of wit, if you think of Joss Whedon's script for the first Avengers film, punctuating that with great, really proper laughs that when you see it with an audience, really get a great laugh in the cinema, is really what kind of elevates stuff and breaks the tension of the fight. I saw 2001 in the cinema, not for the first time, obviously, but a few months ago. And there's actually some really funny lines in that. When you view it in the cinema, that bit where Hal says, "I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave." And you cut to Dave's face, who's like, like that. I've never laughed at it at home, but in the cinema, people were laughing in a good way, not at it, but at the horror of Dave's predicament because he's so completely messed up. That it's so awful that it's funny, and often you can deal with really things that are quite dark and black in nature with humour, and that makes that acceptable, and an audience can sympathise and really empathise with the character more.
That is brilliant. Lovely responses. Okay. Comedic influences. So who do you find funny, and particularly perhaps in the fields that you work in? So if you're working in movies, who do you find funny in movies? Who does Jasper find funny in literature? That's good. Yeah. Over to you, Jim. Or does Jasper want to begin this time?
Yeah, no, I'll start. I think it's from everywhere. I mean, if you just choose one particular area, then you're selling yourself woefully short. And some of one of the nicest sort of comedy influences I find is overhearing conversations in railway trains, and because they have no context to them. And I often sort of, if I speak to, friends or anything, and they say, "Oh, I had a really good one," and somebody said they're on a bus, and somebody at the back said, in a very sort of clear and sort of a voice, full of sort of dedication and completeness, said, I hear that Haddock's making a comeback. And this is sort of natural comedy that you discover around the place. And you just take it from everywhere. I have this thing I'm doing at the moment when I'm doing talks. I often talk about things which are well named and things which aren't well named. Right? For instance, a waterfall is very well named, right? But a chicken sandwich is not well named, because a chicken sandwich should be everything. It should be the beak and the feathers and the feet. So it's actually not that well named. So you can just, even by looking at just stuff around you, you can find all the comedy that is there, and it's just a rich mine. It's just everywhere.
That brings me nicely on, actually. For us, obviously, it starts with a script. But actually, the things that are most memorable and the things that people mostly quote to me, apart from "I don't want to be a chicken sandwich," is Creature Comforts, and that is us talking. So we could be seagulls, we could be dogs or fleas, and I do occasionally, in my travels, get to meet people who I have made in plasticine form, and then have turned out to be the voices of those characters. So I think actually, the humour in Creature Comforts is really pure, and actually could work as a radio. Well, actually, it's essentially like the listening project for the BBC. It's conversations, and there's so much humour in and ridiculousness in what we say. And I think actually half of it you can't really write as good as that. The things that come out of people's mouths and out of context or subverted slightly. We never try to poke fun at people in Creature Comforts. The only time we've ever done that, talking to Richard Starzak, who's the director of Creature Comforts, the only time they did that was with interviewing American Scientologists, and they made them into alien greys. And the guy who was interviewed was so upset that he gave his money back and said, "You are peddlers of the S-bomb, and your work is S." But they also realized that they stepped over a line and actually had kind of tricked people into and set them up for a fall, and there was no humor in that. Whereas actually the joy of people just talking about, it's easily off and honorable and all those different bits and pieces are really, really joyous. And I think, the natural comedy that we have within us and a sense of ridiculous, I think is what's really pure, and I think gets to the heart of everything we've written is brilliant. But I think actually just people inherently, as you say, are ridiculous and funny, and I think that's where the real kind of joy, basic joy lies. And I think that stands up in stand-up comedians and writers and everything.
Sort of the observation of everyday life and the daft things that come out of people's mouths. The one thing I was wondering about Creature Comforts, so these were just regular interviews with regular people, weren't they? They were unscripted. And did anyone other than the Scientologists, but they get upset about everything, but other than the Scientologists, did anyone else get upset with how they were portrayed? Was someone really upset that they suddenly became a panda or something like this?
It's something we were constantly frightened about. We never got to actually see who the people were. It's often until there was a making of program. So we did one project called Creature Discomforts, which was for the Leonard Cheshire Foundation, which is a disability charity, and they do amazing work. But this one actually on audio sounds dreadful, and it's people saying, I literally can't get into a shop because people haven't put a ramp, or they've put something in there, but I can't fit my wheelchair through, or, I'm not able to go bungee jumping because of such and such, even though I am, because of a perceived discrimination against me. And we're listening to it thinking, this is awful and really, almost grotesque. And we thought, we're really worried about actually being involved with it at all. And then once we made it, and we showed it to the people very nervously, we had slugs in wheelchairs. We had a stick insect that had a walking stick that was his grandson, that sprouted arms and legs and became his grandson. And actually, it's one of my greatest moments in model making was my boss was, we were against a very tight deadline. And he's a guy from Topworth Brow in Bolton. And he's like, bloody hell, I've got to get this thing done. I've got to make a stick insect. How am I going to do that? I've got 20 minutes to make a stick insect for the movie. And I leant out the window and there were some bushes, and I got a knife and I cut a bit of branch off and put some plasticine eyes on, and I went, what's more sticky than a stick? So we actually made a stick insect out of living stick. So the thing when we thought we were actually going to cause offence, people were overjoyed to be slugs and hedgehogs in wheelchairs, and a bull terrier with crutches and a crash helmet. People absolutely adore being, people like having the kind of the Mickey taken out of them in a very gentle way. And people like that attention. And actually, so apart from their alien greys, that's the only time we've ever actually caused offence. Everybody's been, whether they're a flea or a crab or a stick insect or a dung beetle, they're absolutely overjoyed. So you can literally do anything to anybody if you make them in plasticine, really. Yeah.
That is brilliant. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Andrew.
Okay.
For me, my comedy gods growing up were Groucho Marx in old Marx Brothers films on BBC Two, Phil Silvers in Bilko, which I love, and Eric Morecambe. Those are kind of like three comedy gods that if they just walked on the stage, it's just they're all such funny guys and funny people that's amazing. In books, I started reading Hitchhiker's Douglas Adams when I was a teenager, so it would be Douglas Adams, who I got to know later on when we shared a literary agent. And in comics, there's a writer called Peter David who did a long run on the Hulk in the kind of late 80s, and his writing was really brilliant at. It kind of like the good Marvel movies. He would have a lot of good action, a lot of good character, and he'd have really witty dialogue. Peter David, he's great. He passed away maybe 18 months ago, but his run on the Hulk is kind of really brilliant comics and also really witty, kind of West Wing, classy dialogue.
I think it's interesting. Sort of, I totally agree here. It's like comedy for me, like. Nowadays, definitely the influence is everything that happens around. You know, is stand-up especially is very much based on observational. What do you see in the world? How do we make it a little bit stranger? How do we heighten it? So I totally agree. If I want to get specific with like influences, I mean, obviously I'm Scottish, so Billy Connolly is the greatest comedian of all time. You know, and I grew up on a healthy diet of him and Robin Williams as well, and Eddie Murphy back when he was doing stand-up, and then in more UK-based comics as well. So Eddie Izzard, but it wasn't. Comedians didn't influence me for comedy. Like it was when I went into a library and I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy first time, and that's when I discovered how funny things could be, and that sort of influenced my that idea of like how mundane life is and how funny it can be. When you just take a slightly weird turn on everything, when you just notice those things that are just slightly off, that's what I liked, and then that got me into comedy, and then I got influenced by them. So yeah, really, it all started from like reading is where it starts. You know, Hitchhikers, Terry Pratchett, all of these things. Those were my sort of fountains of knowledge for when it came to comedy, really. So.
Wonderful. That actually really is going to lead very nicely into the next question. You were saying, you know, the best Avengers movie, you know, is one that has a good mix of action and plot and comedy and sort of light-hearted moments. So I've been pestering my dear old mum to read Terry Pratchett for years, and I finally broke her resolve and thrust my well-thumbed copy of Guards into her hands, and she went away and she made it a third of the way through and then said, I can't do it. And I was like, okay, woman, seriously, what's wrong with you? And she said, I found it too funny and I couldn't follow the plot. I thought, this is interesting. She was laughing so much and sort of nudging my dad when he was trying to sleep and reading bits out to him and stuff, that by the time she'd sort of, you know, got her head back together after a gag, she was like, what's actually happening here? So my question is there a balance that needs to be struck in putting comedy into your work, and how do you go about achieving it? Should we start with Andrew, because you were the one that was...
Sure. So comedy in my... I don't write very much out-and-out write comedy. I did adapt a book called Bernicula, which is a very famous book in America about a vampire bunny, and that's very silly. And the comic strip version, the graphic novel version of that, was kind of influenced a lot by Mad Magazine, if anyone here remembers Mad Magazine reading it, and the characters break the fourth wall like they do in the Muppet Show, because that seemed to be, they were such big characters, they seemed to kind of want to go beyond the page. But mostly I use comedy to punctuate between stuff and to give a difference of tone. and whatnot. It's great as well. I reminded like Douglas Adams stuff of how many fantastic ideas you can play around with comedy. So it's funny, but it also kind of has a more serious point. Like Douglas Adams, just he had the idea of when people were discussing if there's a God or not, and proof of God and intelligent design, of this sentient puddle, which is a puddle becomes sentient, and then it's laying in its hole, and it thinks, oh, how did I get here? Wow, I'm such an amazing fit for this hole. This hole fits me exactly. Well, clearly this hole must have been created by God, because it can't be coincidence that I, the puddle, am a perfect shape to fit in this hole. And I think some of the great comedy is when you get something that's funny, but it's also illustrating a really profound idea, but making it funny as well and making you think.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I also think like comedy works when it's a shared experience, when it's someone able to point to the absurdity of a situation. I'll give you an example. Like I wrote a routine about the bus. Like, how could you write comedy about a bus? Well, it's pretty simple. Like, so literally something that we've all been on buses, I assume. Yeah, we've all sat on buses. And so I sat on the bus and I observed this thing happening. It's that, when you all sit on the bus, everyone takes a double seat to themselves. That's one of the rules, isn't it? And then someone is allowed to sit next to you, but we all get angry when that person doesn't move when the bus empties, don't we? The bus empties, that person sitting next to you, and you're like, don't do that. Right, we get upset with that. That's one of the rules. They've broken the rules. So for me, that was a situation that we all share. We all know that situation. So from that point, it's about what's the story behind that. It's that we all use buses. We're all aware of the rules of the bus, such as thanking the driver. Don't put your feet on the seats. And if there's a double seat, you get it to yourself. And if the bus fills up, someone is allowed to sit next to you. But if the bus empties, everyone moves. And if that person doesn't move, they are a psychopath about to kill you. Yeah. So that's a funny bit already there. So then the next question is, how do we heighten that? So I then tell you the story that happened to me the other day, because it happened to you the other day. It happened to you the other day. We've all got on the bus, sat down, someone sat next to us, and they haven't moved when the bus is emptied. So then how do I make that funny? Well, I turn around, the story continues, I go home, I tell my wife about this. Someone sat next to me on the bus and didn't move when the bus emptied. And I asked my wife, don't you think that's ridiculous that the person didn't move? To which she'll say, no. And I'll say, why? What do you mean? She'll say, because we got on that bus together. So it's taking that everyday situation. All of that's come from and not all came from me just sitting on a bus and observing people sitting next to each other and experiencing that together. It's a shared experience that we all know. And that's what makes that balance of comedy. I couldn't just tell you and say, my wife said we got on that bus together. That doesn't work by itself. That punchline doesn't work. The story is what matters. When I tell that on stage, there's a good 3-4 minutes where there's no laughs. It's just me setting it up to then break the tension with that laugh, right, that punchline right at the end. And that's how important it is to have the setting, the story, before you tell the joke.
Yeah, I mean, in bus stories, I got on a bus and sat down next to this guy, and he just glared at me for the next minute. And in an empty bus, I get to sit next to the nutter. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When you're writing, of course, stand-up is very different to... And stand-up is very similar and very different to writing a book. Because when you're stand-up, obviously you're setting up and you're paying off. And essentially, that's what you're doing when you're telling a story. Any story is a good setup, and it's a little bit of extra detail, and then you're paying it off. When you're writing a novel, of course, you have a lot more things available to you. And you can do, I think, really quite complex setups that can last almost an entire book. And I think, with stand-up, especially, I mean, I really like arc stand-up much more than just one-liners. Because one-liners, you step out of it and you think, well, which joke can I remember to tell tomorrow? And the answer is probably none of them. But if you're listening to a stand-up who does an arc of a story, where there's like little miniature story arcs and then an entire story arc that runs through it all, you remember a lot more. So a really good setup is really important, and that is available to you in books, which I find are really good to do. But of course, you don't know whether it's going to work until it's published, and that could be 18 months into the future. So understanding how to make that work has to be an intuitive dark art. And I think often that's why authors can take a long time to actually really get up to speed and about figuring out the writing. And when you're doing stand-up, you'll know very soon what works because you've got it live right there in front of you. You've got instant feedback. With an author, you have to really kind of work for quite a few years to make it work for you in a really, really good way. And that's why that sort of there's a modern sort of way of writing, which you kind of write and then perhaps you get it out on Kindle or whatever, and it doesn't work, and maybe you give up. And I think this is a great shame because I think there's a lot of very talented writers out there who just need to do more work at it to be able to figure it out. And essentially what you're doing when you're writing, you could spend maybe 8-10 years and 6 novels before you finally start hitting your stride. And what you're trying to do is trying to teach yourself to do something without really thinking. And that's the same when it comes to writing or sculpting or animating or stand-up or anything like that, is you want to get to a point where you're not really thinking about what you're doing, and then it really kind of works for you. And if any authors here, you might be able to recognize that one of the best sentences you ever wrote, you just put it straight down and you know you didn't think about writing it. So it's an odd, dark art and often quite intuitive.
I was just going to say, to agree with Jasper, one of the things that I think has changed in publishing is that there's less mentorship for young writers coming in, because everything these days is a little bit more, it's a huge hit or it's not. When I started, an editor would take an interest in you and take you on, and if your first book did well or it didn't do well, there'd be a second and a third, and you had that chance to learn and build, and also build a bit of an audience. And now, in some ways, it's easier to get in than ever because more books are published, but it's harder to stay in because if the first book's not a hit, young people can be out that revolving door. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I think it's very similar for us in animation, but I think we make a film in several stages from the written form. So if you can make people write in a script form, then that's brilliant. Then you take it to comic book form, is what I always say. Storyboard artists are essentially co-directors. You're working with, say, Wes Anderson or Nick Park, and you're co-directing, you're creating the camera angle. So actually, you can immediately destroy a joke by not having the right camera angle or viewpoint, or the right timing, giving it space to breathe. If you can make people laugh and they can sit through a 90-minute animatic, a storyboard version of a film, and you can make people laugh and cry, then you know that you're onto something. But again, you can destroy it again with the mistimed bit of acting from the animation as well. So actually, the gag and seeing it to its fully formed thing can actually take sometimes a couple of weeks, but sometimes it can be 3 years or 5 years. In case of Chicken Run, from script to screen was 7 years or something like that. So trying to keep that joke fresh as well is a real art. And again, it gets lost what you think is going to be funny and what's in your head is funny, and you know when the joke is coming, to what actually a blind audience is. So actually, I'm a kind of against test audiences, but test audiences can be very useful to see whether a film actually works. So the humour can be in your head, and you're building it, going, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. And then you go, why have you not laughed? And then you realise it's just something that you've mistimed. So it's really interesting to see how that progresses from watching it from my point of view, whereas I make the models that become the animated form. So where there's very little opportunity for me personally to add humour. So I add little background gags and things like that. So we had, so actually on the bus, there's a really nice scene that actually I think kind of got dropped from Shaun the Movie, where an animal inspector, a deafer inspector, comes along, and the sheep have escaped, and they're sat dressed as people. It's a classic slapstick of stick 3 sheep in a puffer jacket and a hat, and the sheep poos itself, and then pretend to quickly pick them up and put them in a bag, and then so they look like chocolate drops or Maltesers, and then offers them to the DEFRA inspector. And it's that kind of thing. But there's the kind of visual little things you can add in there. And actually, in comic book form, it's hilarious. But actually, in animated form, it really lost its humour. So I like to add little incremental bits of humour. We did a thing called Wayne the Zebra on Rex the Runt. And zebras are actually one of the things you avoid animating because they don't really work. Like in wildlife photography, they camouflage themselves, so it's very hard to see what's working. So fire, water, and zebras are the things that you try and avoid. But Wayne the Zebra ended up as a ventriloquist puppet, actually voiced by Bobby Ball. And he did a terrible rap, or we made him do a terrible rap at one point with a ventriloquist dummy. But every time we cut back to him, we thought we'd make him a rapper, so we put a backwards cap on. And I thought, can I add a Flavor Flav clock? But we started with a wristwatch around his neck, and then we cut to another scene, and then it came back, and then it was a kitchen clock. And in the end, he had a grandfather clock and was dragging this huge... But it's things that don't break the humour of the gag, but they're just nice little incremental things. And I think there's a real joy in that, in not being so pleased with yourself that you take yourself out of that. So I think the fourth wall thing can be take you out of the story. And actually, I think Terry Pratchett can be guilty of that. Like you say, actually, you can lose the story arc because you're so thrilled with the fact that you've made this funny thing and you've made your audience laugh that you've kind of killed the story. And that's a really dangerous thing, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, at first I was horrified that dear old mum didn't want to read the book, but I did actually kind of see what she was getting at, and that sometimes you're laughing so much it distracts you. But you've all touched on something quite interesting there about when creating a joke, the sort of anxiety as to whether it will land. And I mean, Rik, obviously as a stand-up comedian, you're going to get that feedback really quickly. You guys as writers, as you say, you can be writing a joke, but it can be a year or more before it actually gets out there to an audience. And then for you, Jim, as you said, 7 years you're hanging around these jokes. So I'm wondering, how do you know a joke is going to land? And if you don't know, how do you deal with that uncertainty? I'll start with Rik.
No, I'm itching to get into this one because it's quite interesting. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So yes, stand-up does have a degree of like instant feedback. Yeah, absolutely. But it can take years for a joke to work. I know that sounds really weird. Like, so as you can write a joke and you can go, and in your head you're like, I'm sure this is really funny. I find this funny. I know that other people are going to find it funny. But it can take years for it to work because sometimes it might not be the right time for that joke. Sometimes it might not be in the right situation. Sometimes you've put it in the wrong place. Sometimes there's something there's some little bit that you've not added visually. And that's the thing. Stand-up is it's not just about talking. It is visual as well. You know, you are on that stage. It's something you might do, a look, a movement, something like that. And so, yeah, there is a lot of anxiety when I write something new. Is this going to work? Because I've had a lot of experience, especially in the early days of stand-up, where when you start off, you are going to bomb 90% of the time you stand on stage. And what will happen is that the first time you stand on the stage and you tell jokes, you're going to do fine. And it's going to be okay. And you'll go, I can do this. And then you'll get into your third or fourth gig and you will have a horrendous time because you've gone out and you've gone, right, I did really well with that set of jokes. So now I'm going to write a completely brand new set of jokes and I'm going to do all of them. But none of them are as good as your previous set of jokes. You haven't put all the time and effort into these new sets of jokes that you did put into that first set of jokes. So then you go out and you do that. And then that puts in that anxiety of every time then from then on, you're writing these jokes going, are these the ones that are going to bomb? But then you learn a bit of resilience because if you know you can do it once, you can do it twice, you can do it a third time, and it's about refining. It's about getting back on that stage. And as a stand-up, you are seeing most of the time, most people are seeing the final polished product. So you're seeing a stand-up special on Netflix. You're going to a comedy club and seeing a show at the end, or seeing a show at the Edinburgh Fringe, or something like that, and you're seeing someone do an hour. That hour has come from years of hard work and years of going in to do 5 minutes in a cafe in front of 5 people, and 3 of them are actually dogs, and trying to make that joke work. And then it suddenly gets to that final stage. So when you to deal with that anxiety, it's just being sure you know, having a vision in your head, understanding where you're wanting to get to, and sort of working towards that, and just understanding that failure is part of the process. And in fact, sometimes the best jokes come from your failures as well. I used to do a thing called, well, I still do it because movies with dinosaurs. And I do it on a sketch pad, drawn out, very badly drawn out, deliberately badly drawn out, scenes of and one of them, the first one I ever did was Gone with the Wind with dinosaurs. And it's that famous last scene, and he goes, Rhett, where do I go? What do I do? And he goes, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And he walks off into the mist, and I finish it off with him getting eaten by a T-Rex, right? Which I thought was very funny, and people thought it was very funny. And I thought, this could work for kids as well. Right, and so I did it for an audience of children, and I did the whole thing, and none of them laughed. It's horrible, right? And then one of them put their hand up and said, actually, T-Rexes have 3 fingers, not 2. Which then led to me taking that away and going, okay, that's fine. Okay, so I took that away, did it to adults, showed them that thing. They laughed and I went, let me tell you about this time this happened. This kid said, actually 3 fingers, not 2. And I said, well, here's the other finger, right? So it's sometimes the anxiety, the failures are actually can lead to even funnier successes later down the line. So it's understanding that everything counts, everything works towards it.
Can I ask, the bit I don't get involved with so much is the writing. How do you mitigate, or how do you deal with the fact that actually your reader could be a terrible comedian and completely not, destroy the delivery in their own head, or reading it to a child? How do you cope with that?
Well, yeah, I was going to say when you're doing it in books, you are obviously more distant, which in some ways is good, because I think being a stand-up comedian is probably the most scary, difficult thing you can do in kind of art world. But also you want them to land. So kind of when we're writing, obviously you always want every joke to land 100%. Obviously that's completely unrealistic. That's never going to happen. As a bottom line, you want to make sure that you're not giving any offense with the joke. So if you're doing books, you're doing graphic novels for young adults and stuff, it's really important that the joke can't be misinterpreted to be offensive. I think if there's a joke that doesn't land in a book, that's one thing. You just go, oh, that's not so funny, but hopefully other things are funny. It's quite dangerous if you have jokes in books that are not funny enough to be registered as a joke. Then it can confuse people, like you've been talking about with the plot, and say, oh, they said they were going to go over to that building and kill everyone. Why are they doing that? And it's like, no, that character's being sarcastic. So whether it's a good joke or not, it needs to be flagged up enough most of the time so that when the reader reads it, it is a joke, and also talking about kind of building on stories, as Rik was. I remember very strongly reading Hitchhiker's Guide, and the biography at the back that the note that Douglas Adams has written ended with Douglas Adams is not married, has no children, and does not live in Surrey. Right, that was his little way of subverting, having a gag at the end of normally very bad. When the second book came out, about 5 years later, whatever it was, the last line of his bio in that was, Douglas Adams is still not married, has no kids, and does not wish to hear from any more Surrey estate agents.
Just briefly about sort of landing jokes. Quite often, when I'm writing, the books are, they're absurdist books, but there's obviously a plot going on as well, and there's some interesting stuff I want to get across. Sometimes, quite often, people come, when you get feedback from people talking about the books, the things they found really funny are ones that I didn't intend to be. They were whimsical asides, or they were just off-the-cuff remarks that I just put in. Without thinking, that was going to be a real point. It was just like a thing, just that you add it. And they're the ones that really, really tickled them, because they had a context to it that I didn't have. There was something in their life that really, really landed for them. So often, it's actually not the ones that you think are really going to work, that work. And it's like, oh, okay, well, what happened there? And sometimes you don't know. And it's this like really weird, dark art. But another brief thing on what Jim was saying. I was looking for a sort of comedy constant timing, because I suddenly thought, I wonder if, you've all seen Tex Avery cartoons, and you've all seen Wile E. Coyote, right, falling away. And he falls away, and he becomes a dot, and then he vanishes, and then there is a period of time before you see the dust explode. Now, I was convinced in myself that period of time would be the same throughout comedy. So then I was looking up on Spinal Tap to see whether the gap between why don't you make 10 louder, pause, this goes to 11, right, to see if the timing was correct. They're not. But once you start looking at other things, like, again, Wile E. Coyote, how long does he look at you before he realizes he's in midair and falling? And it's quite interesting to look at all the things. Generally speaking, they're between 3/4 of a second and just under 2 seconds. And it was what you were saying about how things can go not funny. And if that timing was any longer, if Wile E. Coyote was falling to his comeuppance, if it was any longer, it wouldn't work. If it was any shorter, it wouldn't work. But no one really just sort of sat there and figured out, I think this should be 3/4 of a second. They just looked at it and went, this works. And I think often with comedy is we can talk about comedy and everything, but when we're actually in the wild doing it, it's like, yeah, I think that works. And that's, you know, the genius of stand-up is like you see some work and it's amazing stuff. I mean, it really is amazing because it works in a fantastically brilliant, subtle way that you can't define. You cannot come out and say, why was that funny? And in fact, you shouldn't be asking yourself, why is that funny? It just is, you know. Anyway.
Okay. Something just dawned on me, so I'm going to add a question. Jim, you know, if you're working on something for 7 years and working perhaps on a visual gag, which I'm guessing to animate some visual gags, it takes, you know, a week or something. And you know, Rik, for yourself, you know, as a stand-up comedian, you're going to be telling the same joke again and again and again. And for you guys, perhaps when you're writing and going back and editing and revising and stuff like this, do you ever get sick of a joke? Do you ever find yourself just going, this isn't funny anymore, or I don't find this funny anymore, and then lose faith in it?
I think the repetition thing stands. I think the Stuart Lee model of repeat it, you know, or drive it into the ground and kill it and then bring it back to life, I think certainly stands. I think that's definitely a trope that works. But yeah, you can get thoroughly sick until you've got an audience. So we have rushes, and we know obviously longer work in film, but we sit around and we watch edited versions of our Shaun the Sheep episodes or a feature film, and you can get thoroughly cheesed off with it. I would say that Nick Park still laughs every time he sees the clip with brown flakes with Wallace and Gromit. He still kills himself laughing. I don't think it's not even a great joke, but he still absolutely kills himself laughing.
Is that one of his own jokes?
Yes. Oh, yeah, totally, yeah. And it's a box of brown flakes, and it appears in almost every episode, and he still cries laughing. It's not, no. I mean, I'm not a millionaire, so obviously I'm missing something. But sometimes when you add the audience, then you suddenly see the joy back in it again, and actually watching the audience reacting to the thing, actually, even though you've got thoroughly cheesed off with the whole thing, actually having an audience and it not being in your head, it suddenly becomes alive, and that's quite a magical thing. And I imagine that can be the same for you. You can either lose faith, or actually it's trying to pick out why they laughed. As we was just saying, actually, those things that are the asides have an ease to them that is really joyous. And again, context as well about where you're screening something, whether it's in a festival and people are hungover, and actually sometimes a very good audience because they're all feeling a bit queasy and they've got kids running around, or you know, the wrong place can completely kill a thing. So actually, the right audience, I think, is a really good thing. So actually, yeah, again, you can lift the joke again once you've got an audience to watch it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that works for you when you've got a test screening audience, and for you when you're in front of an audience. And what about for you guys as writers when your audience is hidden and laughing in private? How do you get feedback from readers easily enough? We'll start with Jasper.
But only after you've been published. So I think, you know, the long form novel it takes a lot of training and a lot of failure. I mean, it's very interesting. You know, if you enjoyed my second to last book, then that's probably because the 3 books before that it wasn't very good. And you build on failure, but the feedback takes a long time. And whilst you're waiting for the feedback, you're actually probably writing your next book. So you really have to have confidence in yourself. And once you've done it a few times, you realize, I think this works. And there is a sense of stubbornness within you that kind of thinks, yeah, I think this does work. And I think people do enjoy it. And when you start writing, especially if you're a comedy writer or an absurdist writer, you're often writing for yourself. You're writing to amuse yourself because this is the things that interest you. And if you look at writing or any performative art at all, whether artistic or whatever, is exporting a worldview. You know, and certainly Aardman has a worldview, which is very nice, I think. Very British. Then if you've got a worldview that is slightly quirky and it kind of working for you, and you like doing these jokes and you put them down and you think it kind of works, and then you find that it does, then you have a sort of sense of confidence that can carry you on. But it doesn't work all the time. Yeah.
It's important to know when to lock in. I think so. When we've got early chapters of a graphic novel that have got gags in or that are happy with, we don't go back and keep revisiting or trying to add more words or trying to make the joke better, because I think that would be in danger of pulling the wings off the butterfly. It's kind of like when it's funny and the editor likes it and we like it and that's finished, then that bit, barring proofreading and correcting mistakes, that bit's finished. Because if we kept going back to the gags, I just think you could really easily overwork them or make them longer or too complicated and take away that. So you need to be confident in them, as Jasper says, and then for me, step away and say that's done now, finished. Let the audience enjoy it if they can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I have one more question, but we have only 1 minute left. So I'm gonna say we're only allowed answers of one word and maximum 3 syllables. So I'm looking for advice to budding writers looking to bring comedy into their work. What one word of advice would you have? I'll start with Andrew this time.
Write for yourself, like Jasper said. What makes you laugh will make other people laugh.
One word, yeah. One word, 3 syllables. Oh, okay. I can have a sentence. Oh, yes, no, but actually, observe everything. Humor is everywhere. Just observe everything and look for the mundane and the absurdity of the mundane.
Yeah. Don't write to market. Write for yourself.
Add more bums.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much, chaps. It is brilliant to have you here. Obviously, all 4 of them are doing other things today, and there'll be lots of opportunities for people to catch up with them and have a natter with them out and about. So can we have one more round of applause for our wonderful, wonderful panel this morning? That is great. So thanks so much. I think next up is here is going to be Gary, who's going to be talking about archery in various different fantasy and sci-fi movies, but not Hawk the Slayer. I'm very disappointed in him. But other than that, I think it's going to be a cracking talk. So thank you so much, folks.